Move your things to the guest room, the master bedroom is ours now. I stood there in disbelief, but what I did 3 weeks later left my son and his girlfriend completely devastated. I'm grateful you're here to listen. Stay with me until the end and comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far my story travels. I never imagined that at 70 years old, I'd be kicked out of my own bedroom by my own son. But there I was, on a gray Tuesday morning in October, standing in the doorway of the master bedroom I'd slept in for 35 years, watching my son Dashiell and his girlfriend Sienna Cruz rearrange my furniture like I was already invisible. "Mom, we already discussed this," Dashiell said, not even bothering to look at me as he pushed my antique dresser toward the hallway. The dresser that had belonged to my grandmother, with its hand-carved rose details and brass handles that I polished every month. Sienna needs space for her wardrobe, and the master bedroom is the only room with adequate closet space for both of us. We hadn't discussed anything. Not really. 3 days ago, on Saturday evening while I was preparing dinner, Dashiell had simply announced, not asked, announced, that he was moving Sienna into my house. Into the 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow on Maple Ridge Drive that I'd worked 2 jobs to pay off after his father Marcus died of a heart attack 15 years ago. This was the house where I'd raised Dashiell alone after becoming a widow at 55. The house where I'd sacrificed vacation trips to the coast, new winter coats, girls' nights with friends, and any semblance of a social life so that my son could have private piano lessons with Mrs. Kensington, attend the expensive summer science camp at Riverside Academy, and eventually graduate from Whitmore University with his business degree. I'd scraped together every penny. I'd worked as a secretary at Brennan & Associates law firm during the day and cleaned offices at the Harborview Medical Complex 3 nights a week. My hands had been raw from industrial cleaning solutions. My back had ached from bending over desks and mopping floors. But I'd done it all gladly because Dashiell was my world, my purpose, my reason for getting up every morning. And now, at 32 years old, successful and working as a regional manager at Thornfield Marketing Solutions, he was standing in my bedroom treating me like I was an inconvenient tenant he needed to relocate. "Dashiell, this is my bedroom," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I've slept in this room since before you were born. Your father and I picked out that light fixture together." I pointed to the vintage crystal chandelier that Marcus had surprised me with on our 10th anniversary. "Surely Sienna could use the guest room? It's a beautiful space with the bay window overlooking the garden, and it has." "The guest room?" Sienna's voice sliced through mine like a razor blade. She emerged from my walk-in closet holding 3 of my cardigans in her arms, looking at them with barely disguised revulsion. "Margaret, no offense, but I'm not about to live in some cramped little guest room when there's a perfectly good master suite sitting here available." The way she said my name, Margaret, made it sound like an insult. Like I was some elderly stranger she'd just met at a bus stop, not the mother of the man she'd been dating for 8 months. Sienna was 28 years old, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive salon appointments at Luxe Beauty Bar and an Instagram feed full of carefully filtered selfies. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves that she was constantly flipping over her shoulder. Her nails were always freshly manicured in trendy colors. This week they were a deep burgundy that matched her designer handbag. She wore clothes with labels I recognized from window shopping at the Riverside Mall: Rebecca Minkoff, Kate Spade, Michael Kors. Everything about Sienna screamed expensive, from her highlighted hair to her leather ankle boots. And everything about the way she looked at me screamed disdain. "The guest room isn't cramped," I protested, hating how weak I sounded. "It's 12 by 14 feet, with its own attached bathroom and a lovely reading nook by the..." "Mom." Dashiell finally turned to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my breath catch. There was no warmth there, no recognition of our shared history, no acknowledgement that I was his mother who had given up everything for him. Just cold impatience. "You're one person. We're a couple building a life together. Basic logic says we need the master suite more than you do. You'll be perfectly comfortable in the guest room. But all my things, my clothes, my photos, your father's. We'll help you move everything," Sienna interrupted, already opening my closet wider and running her French manicured fingers across my clothes with obvious distaste. Though honestly, Margaret, you might want to think of this as an opportunity to declutter and downsize. Do you really need all these old, outdated things taking up space? Old things. Outdated things. She was talking about my life. She was dismissing my cream-colored wedding dress, carefully preserved in an acid-free garment bag that I'd saved up to buy. The dress I'd worn when I married Marcus at St. Catherine's Church on a sunny June morning 38 years ago. She was talking about my mother's handmade quilt, the one with the double wedding ring pattern that had taken her 3 years to complete, that had been passed down from my grandmother to my mother to me. The quilt that had covered Dashiell when he was a colicky baby, when I'd walked the floors with him night after night. She was dismissing the photo albums, 12 of them, that documented every year of Dashiell's childhood. His first steps on this very bedroom's hardwood floor. His gap-toothed smile on his first day of kindergarten at Sunnyside Elementary. His proud face at his high school graduation from Riverside High. "Sienna, those are my personal belongings," I managed to say, feeling heat creeping up my neck and into my cheeks. "They have sentimental value. They're memories of. And they'll be perfectly safe in the guest room." Dashiell cut me off, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "Come on, Mom, don't make this into a big dramatic thing. We're trying to start our life together, and we need you to be supportive, not difficult. This is still your house. You're just changing bedrooms. It's not the end of the world." But it felt like the end of my world. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in humiliation. I made trip after trip down the hallway, my arms full of clothes on hangers, while Dashiell and Sienna stood in what was now their bedroom, debating whether to paint the walls sea glass blue or morning mist gray. "I'm thinking we need to completely redecorate," Sienna was saying as I struggled past them carrying my jewelry box, the carved wooden one Marcus had brought back from a business trip to Portland. "This whole country cottage vibe Margaret has going on is so dated. We need something more modern, more sophisticated. Maybe we should look at that new furniture store that opened in the Westfield shopping district." "Whatever you want, babe," Dashiell replied, and I heard him kiss her. In my bedroom. In the space where I'd cried myself to sleep the night Marcus died, where I'd worried over bills and prayed for strength to raise my son alone. I carried my books, mysteries by Agatha Christie and Louise Penny, romance novels by Nora Roberts, the collected poetry of Mary Oliver that I read when I needed comfort. I moved my nightstand, the one Marcus had built for me in his workshop, with the drawer that stuck slightly and the carved heart on the side that only I knew was there. I transported my reading lamp, the brass one with the green glass shade that had been my mother's. My alarm clock, still set to 6:30 a.m. even though I no longer needed to wake up early for work. My reading glasses, my hand cream, my journal where I'd been writing down my thoughts and prayers for the past 20 years. Each trip down the hallway felt like I was erasing myself, piece by piece, from the room that had been my sanctuary. The guest room, my new bedroom, was at the back of the house, facing the neighbor's wooden fence instead of the street. It was less than a third of the size of the master bedroom. My queen bed barely fit between the two walls, and there was no space for my upholstered reading chair or the small writing desk where I used to compose letters to my sister Vivian in Sacramento. I had to stack my photo albums in the closet because there was no bookshelf. My jewelry box sat on top of the narrow dresser, but there was no room for my mother's music box or the collection of ceramic birds I'd been gathering since I was a girl. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar mattress, the one that came with the guest room furniture set I'd bought 12 years ago from a clearance sale at Baxter's Furniture Depot, and felt tears burning behind my eyes. Through the walls, which were thinner here than in the master bedroom, I could hear them laughing. "This is so much better." Sienna's voice carried clearly. "Oh my God, Brandon, look at this bathtub. It's huge. We can finally have those romantic bath nights I've been pinning on Pinterest." Margaret clearly wasn't appreciating what she had here. "She never used half the features in this bathroom," Dashiell agreed. The heated towel rack, the rainfall showerhead, the separate soaking tub, all wasted on her. "She'll be fine in the guest room. It has everything she needs. Everything I need. A bed, a dresser, a bathroom. The bare minimum. Never mind that I'd spent 35 years in that master bedroom. Never mind that every corner held memories of Marcus, of raising Dashiell, of the life I'd built with my own 2 hands and my own stubborn determination. I looked at my reflection in the guest room's small mirror, the plain rectangular one that came with the IKEA dresser I'd assembled myself 5 years ago. My face looked older than I remembered. When had those lines deepened around my eyes? When had my hair become so completely gray? I kept it short now, in a practical bob that I trimmed myself every 6 weeks to save money on salon visits. I was wearing my usual uniform, comfortable elastic waist jeans from Target, a long-sleeved cotton shirt in navy blue, and my worn New Balance sneakers that I'd owned for 3 years. Next to Sienna's designer wardrobe and Instagram-ready outfits, I must have looked like someone's poor elderly relative. When had I become someone my own son could dismiss so easily? When had I transformed from a mom into Margaret, said with that particular tone of disdain? When had I stopped mattering in the home I'd built with my own sacrifice and sweat? That first night in the guest room was one of the longest of my life. The bed was less comfortable than my old one, the mattress was firmer, and it squeaked when I shifted position. The pillows were the cheap polyester kind from a discount store, nothing like my down pillows that I'd saved up to buy as a treat for myself 3 Christmases ago. But worse than the physical discomfort was the psychological displacement. I lay there in the dark, listening to them move around the master bedroom directly above me. I heard their footsteps on the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself 7 years ago, after watching YouTube tutorials and spending 3 weekends on my hands and knees with a sander. I heard water running in the master bathroom, my bathroom, where they were probably using my expensive lavender bath salts that my sister had sent me for my birthday. I heard their voices, muffled but audible, discussing their plans for their room. I heard Sienna's high-pitched laugh, the one she used when Dashiell said something she found charming. I heard my son's deeper voice, responding with an affection he no longer showed me. Sleep didn't come until nearly 3 a.m., and when it did, it was filled with uneasy dreams of being a stranger in my own home. The next few days established a new, uncomfortable routine. Sienna had apparently quit her job as a social media coordinator at some startup company in downtown Riverside. It was totally beneath me anyway, I heard her tell someone on the phone, and now spent her days working on her lifestyle blog and Instagram presence. This mostly involved her taking over my kitchen table as her office, spreading out her laptop, ring lights, and various props for her photos. She'd push aside my small vase of flowers from the garden, my stack of library books, and my crossword puzzle magazine to make room for her content creation station. "Margaret, do you have to hover?" she asked me on Thursday morning when I came into my own kitchen to make tea. "I'm trying to get the lighting right for this flat lay shot, and you're creating shadows." I was creating shadows. In my own kitchen. In the house I owned. "I just need to boil water for tea," I said quietly, moving toward the stove. "Can you wait, like, 10 minutes? I'm almost done with this shoot, and then I need to edit the photos. Natural light is everything for Instagram aesthetics." I waited. I stood in the hallway like a guest in my own home, holding my empty teacup, until Sienna finished her photo session and I was finally allowed to enter my kitchen. Dashiell was gone most days, working long hours at Thornfield Marketing Solutions. When he came home in the evenings, he barely acknowledged me. He'd kiss Sienna hello, ask about her day, admire whatever content she'd created, and then they'd disappear into their bedroom to change for dinner. Dinner. That was another change. Before Sienna moved in, Dashiell and I had eaten together most nights. I'd cook, nothing fancy, just good, simple meals like pot roast with vegetables, or spaghetti with homemade sauce, or baked chicken with rice. We'd sit at the kitchen table, and he'd tell me about his day, about the clients he was working with, about his plans for advancement at the company. Now, Sienna had decided that my cooking was too heavy, too old-fashioned, and not aligned with our wellness goals. She'd taken over meal planning, which consisted of ordering expensive prepared meals from some organic delivery service called Greenleaf Wellness Kitchen. The meals came in compostable containers and cost more than I used to spend on groceries for an entire week. And they ate in the master bedroom, carrying their meals upstairs on a tray, saying they needed couple time and privacy. I was left to eat my dinner alone in the kitchen, often just scrambled eggs or a can of soup, listening to their muffled voices and laughter coming from above. On Sunday evening, 6 days after Sienna had moved in, I tried to reclaim a small piece of normalcy. I'd always watched Masterpiece Mystery on Sunday nights, a ritual I'd maintained for over a decade. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, settled into my favorite spot on the living room sofa, and turned on the television. I was 15 minutes into the program when Sienna and Dashiell came downstairs. "Oh, Margaret, we're watching the game tonight," Sienna said, picking up the remote without asking. "The Riverside Rockets are playing, and Dash promised we'd watch together." I always watch my show on Sunday nights," I ventured. "Maybe you could watch in the bedroom? There's a TV up there." "The bedroom TV is smaller," Dashiell said, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "The living room has the bigger screen." "Come on, Mom, you can watch your show another time." "But it's not on another time. It's on now, and I've been watching this series." "It's not that important," Sienna interrupted, already changing the channel. "Trust me, Margaret, sports are way more engaging than whatever British murder mystery you're into." I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching them settle into the couch, my couch, where I'd sat for years, while a football game I had no interest in played on my television. Then I quietly got up and went to my small guest room, carrying my tea, feeling like an intruder who'd been politely but firmly dismissed. That night, lying in the uncomfortable guest room bed, I asked myself the question that had been growing louder in my mind with each passing day: how had I become so invisible in my own home? But the moment that truly shattered something fundamental inside me, the moment that transformed me from a hurt, confused mother into something harder and more determined, came 3 nights later. It was Wednesday, nearly midnight. I'd been having trouble sleeping, the way I always did now in this unfamiliar room. I got up to get a glass of water, moving quietly through the dark hallway in my bathrobe and slippers, trying not to disturb anyone. As I passed the master bedroom, my former bedroom, I heard voices. The door was slightly ajar, and light spilled out into the hallway. I should have kept walking. I should have gone to the kitchen, gotten my water, and returned to my room without eavesdropping. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the tone of Sienna's voice, sharp and insistent. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some unconscious instinct for self-preservation, warning me that I needed to hear what was being said. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding, and listened. "I'm serious, Brandon. How much longer do we have to keep playing house with your elderly mother?" Sienna's voice was petulant, like a child denied a toy. "This house would be absolutely perfect for just the two of us. We could turn that guest room, her room, into a proper home office for me. I could finally have a dedicated space for filming content and meeting with potential sponsors." There was a pause. Then I heard my son's voice, and what he said made my blood run cold. "Babe, it's technically her house. My name isn't on the deed or anything." "For now," Sienna said, and I could hear her moving around the room, probably pacing the way she did when she was working herself up about something. "But she's 70, Dash. 70. How many good years does she really have left? 5? 10 if we're unlucky? And then what happens?" "Then I inherit," Dashiell said, his voice matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "I'm her only child. She doesn't have any siblings except that sister in California who she barely talks to. Everything comes to me, the house, whatever savings she has, everything." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. My own son, discussing my death like it was a business transaction, an inevitable event to be waited out. "Exactly." Sienna's voice was triumphant now. "So why are we tiptoeing around her feelings? She should be grateful we're even staying here with her, helping her out. Honestly, at her age, she should probably be in one of those senior communities anyway. Sunset Meadows or Riverside Retirement Village or whatever. She'd probably be happier around people her own age." "I've thought about that," Dashiell admitted, and each word felt like a knife twisting in my heart. "But I can't just tell her to leave her own house. People would talk. My colleagues at work, the neighbors, my friends, they'd think I was terrible. It would affect my reputation. So we don't tell her to leave, Sienna said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We make her want to leave. We make her so uncomfortable that she decides on her own that she'd rather be somewhere else. Come on, Dash, you're the one with the business degree. You're supposed to be good at strategy. This is just strategic household management. Dashiell laughed. My son actually laughed at the idea of manipulating me out of my own home. What do you suggest? He asked. We're already doing it, Sienna replied. Taking over the master bedroom was genius. It immediately established that we're the primary residents here and she's secondary. Now we just keep going. We take over more spaces. We change things to suit our preferences, not hers. We make it clear through 1,000 small actions that this is our house now, not hers. And where's she supposed to go? Who cares? Sienna's voice was sharp with impatience. She gets Social Security, doesn't she? She worked for like 40 years or whatever. She must have some savings, some retirement fund. She can afford a little apartment somewhere, or one of those senior living places. They have studios for like $1,500 a month. It's not our problem to solve. $1,500 a month, Dashiell mused. That's actually pretty reasonable. Exactly. And then we'd have this entire house to ourselves. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, that beautiful kitchen, the backyard. We could actually start our life together properly, without having to worry about her feelings or her routines or her being in the way all the time. There was a long pause. My legs were trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud as thunder. Then Dashiell spoke, and his words destroyed what was left of my heart. You're absolutely right. We've been too accommodating, too worried about her comfort. Maybe it's time we start making some bigger changes around here. Speed up the timeline. Make it clear that this is our home now. That's my man, Sienna said, her voice warm with approval. Trust me, Dash, 3 months from now, she'll be settled in some little apartment, and we'll be living our best life in this gorgeous house. And who knows? Maybe the stress of moving will take its toll. Old people don't handle big changes well. Nature might take its course even faster than we think. They were hoping I'd die. My son and his girlfriend were actively hoping that the stress of losing my home would kill me. I stood in that dark hallway, my hands still pressed against my mouth, tears streaming down my face, and felt something inside me break and reform into something entirely different. I was left to eat my dinner alone in the kitchen, often just scrambled eggs or a can of soup, listening to their muffled voices and laughter coming from above. On Sunday evening, 6 days after Sienna had moved in, I tried to reclaim a small piece of normalcy. I'd always watched Masterpiece Mystery on Sunday nights, a ritual I'd maintained for over a decade. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, settled into my favorite spot on the living room sofa, and turned on the television. I was 15 minutes into the program when Sienna and Dashiell came downstairs. Oh, Margaret, we're watching the game tonight, Sienna said, picking up the remote without asking. The Riverside Rockets are playing, and Dash promised we'd watch together. I always watch my show on Sunday nights, I ventured. Maybe you could watch in the bedroom? There's a TV up there. The bedroom TV is smaller, Dashiell said, his tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. The living room has the bigger screen. Come on, Mom, you can watch your show another time. But it's not on another time. It's on now, and I've been watching this series. It's not that important, Sienna interrupted, already changing the channel. Trust me, Margaret, sports are way more engaging than whatever British murder mystery you're into. I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching them settle into the couch, my couch, where I'd sat for years, while a football game I had no interest in played on my television. Then I quietly got up and went to my small guest room, carrying my tea, feeling like an intruder who'd been politely but firmly dismissed. That night, lying in the uncomfortable guest room bed, I asked myself the question that had been growing louder in my mind with each passing day: how had I become so invisible in my own home? But the moment that truly shattered something fundamental inside me, the moment that transformed me from a hurt, confused mother into something harder and more determined, came 3 nights later. It was Wednesday, nearly midnight. I'd been having trouble sleeping, the way I always did now in this unfamiliar room. I got up to get a glass of water, moving quietly through the dark hallway in my bathrobe and slippers, trying not to disturb anyone. As I passed the master bedroom, my former bedroom, I heard voices. The door was slightly ajar, and light spilled out into the hallway. I should have kept walking. I should have gone to the kitchen, gotten my water, and returned to my room without eavesdropping. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the tone of Sienna's voice, sharp and insistent. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was some unconscious instinct for self-preservation, warning me that I needed to hear what was being said. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, my heart pounding, and listened. "I'm serious, Brandon. How much longer do we have to keep playing house with your elderly mother?" Sienna's voice was petulant, like a child denied a toy. This house would be absolutely perfect for just the two of us. We could turn that guest room, her room, into a proper home office for me. I could finally have a dedicated space for filming content and meeting with potential sponsors. There was a pause. Then I heard my son's voice, and what he said made my blood run cold. "Babe, it's technically her house. My name isn't on the deed or anything." "For now," Sienna said, and I could hear her moving around the room, probably pacing the way she did when she was working herself up about something. "But she's 70, 70. How many good years does she really have left? 5? 10 if we're unlucky? And then what happens?" "Then I inherit," Dashiell said, his voice matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "I'm her only child. She doesn't have any siblings except that sister in California who she barely talks to. Everything comes to me, the house, whatever savings she has, everything." My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. My own son, discussing my death like it was a business transaction, an inevitable event to be waited out. "Exactly." Sienna's voice was triumphant now. "So why are we tiptoeing around her feelings? She should be grateful we're even staying here with her, helping her out. Honestly, at her age, she should probably be in one of those senior communities anyway. Sunset Meadows or Riverside Retirement Village or whatever. She'd probably be happier around people her own age." "I've thought about that," Dashiell admitted, and each word felt like a knife twisting in my heart. "But I can't just tell her to leave her own house. People would talk. My colleagues at work, the neighbors, my friends, they'd think I was terrible. It would affect my reputation." "So we don't tell her to leave," Sienna said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We make her want to leave. We make her so uncomfortable that she decides on her own that she'd rather be somewhere else. Come on, Dash, you're the one with the business degree. You're supposed to be good at strategy. This is just strategic household management." Dashiell laughed. My son actually laughed at the idea of manipulating me out of my own home. "What do you suggest?" he asked. "We're already doing it," Sienna replied. Taking over the master bedroom was genius. It immediately established that we're the primary residents here and she's secondary. Now we just keep going. We take over more spaces. We change things to suit our preferences, not hers. We make it clear through 1,000 small actions that this is our house now, not hers. And where's she supposed to go? Who cares?" Sienna's voice was sharp with impatience. "She gets Social Security, doesn't she? She worked for like 40 years or whatever. She must have some savings, some retirement fund. She can afford a little apartment somewhere, or one of those senior living places. They have studios for like $1,500 a month. It's not our problem to solve." $1,500 a month, Dashiell mused. "That's actually pretty reasonable." "Exactly. And then we'd have this entire house to ourselves. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, that beautiful kitchen, the backyard. We could actually start our life together properly, without having to worry about her feelings or her routines or her being in the way all the time. There was a long pause. My legs were trembling so badly I had to lean against the wall to stay upright. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud as thunder. Then Dashiell spoke, and his words destroyed what was left of my heart. You're absolutely right. We've been too accommodating, too worried about her comfort. Maybe it's time we start making some bigger changes around here. Speed up the timeline. Make it clear that this is our home now. That's my man, Sienna said, her voice warm with approval. Trust me, Dash, 3 months from now, she'll be settled in some little apartment, and we'll be living our best life in this gorgeous house. And who knows? Maybe the stress of moving will take its toll. Old people don't handle big changes well. Nature might take its course even faster than we think. They were hoping I'd die. My son and his girlfriend were actively hoping that the stress of losing my home would kill me. I stood in that dark hallway, my hands still pressed against my mouth, tears streaming down my face, and felt something inside me break and reform into something entirely different. The soft, accommodating, endlessly sacrificing mother who had given up everything for her son, she died in that moment. What remained was someone harder. Someone who had finally, after 70 years of putting everyone else first, decided it was time to fight for herself. I crept back to the guest room, my water forgotten. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in the dark, listening to them eventually turn off their light and settle into sleep in my bed, in my room, in my house that they were planning to steal from me. And I began to plan. They wanted this house. They were counting on my death to get it. They thought I was just a helpless old woman who would quietly disappear to make room for their perfect life. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By the time dawn broke through the guest room window, I had made my decision. I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I knew that when I was finished, Dashiell and Sienna would regret the day they decided to underestimate Margaret Catherine Hartley. The war had begun. They just didn't know it yet. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief and shock from the previous night had crystallized into something more useful, determination. I'd spent decades being the peacemaker, the accommodator, the one who swallowed her pride and hurt feelings to keep everyone else comfortable. That version of Margaret Hartley was gone. I got up at 6:30 a.m., my usual time, even though I no longer had a job to get ready for. Old habits die hard. I showered in the guest bathroom with its builder-grade fixtures and mediocre water pressure, so different from the luxury rainfall shower in the master bath that was now theirs. I dressed in my usual casual clothes, a pair of comfortable jeans and a soft gray sweater, and headed to the kitchen. The house was quiet. Dashiell and Sienna wouldn't emerge from the master bedroom for at least another 2 hours. My son had always been a late sleeper, even as a child, and Sienna seemed to consider waking before 9 a.m. to be some sort of personal failure. I made myself a pot of coffee, real coffee, the good French roast from Carrington's coffee house that I usually reserved for special occasions, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. It was an old Dell that Dashiell had given me 5 years ago when he'd upgraded to something newer, but it worked well enough for what I needed. I spent the next 3 hours doing research. I started with the basics, property law in Oregon, specifically regarding homeownership and tenant rights. Then I moved on to more specific topics, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and the legal protections available to seniors. What I discovered made my coffee go cold in the cup. Oregon had strong laws protecting elderly homeowners from being pushed out of their properties. There were provisions against financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. There were resources available through the state's Department of Human Services. There were legal aid organizations that specialized in elder law. But more importantly, I learned something that made a grim smile cross my face. As the sole owner of the property, with my name alone on the deed, I had absolute authority over who lived in my house and under what conditions. Dashiell had no legal claim to this property until I died or voluntarily transferred ownership. His assumption that he would inherit was just that, an assumption. I could sell the house tomorrow if I wanted to. I could donate it to charity. I could leave it to my sister Vivian in Sacramento. The power had always been mine. I'd just forgotten I had it. I was deep into reading about Oregon property transfer laws when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly closed my laptop and stood up to refill my coffee cup, trying to look casual. Sienna entered the kitchen first, wearing one of those expensive athleisure outfits that cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 6 months. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, her face already made up with what she called her natural look, which actually involved about 15 different products that she'd taken over half my bathroom counter to store. "Margaret," she said, not quite looking at me as she headed straight for the refrigerator. "Did you move my cold-pressed juice? I had 3 bottles of the Green Goddess blend in here." "I haven't touched anything in the refrigerator," I replied evenly. She made an irritated sound and continued searching, moving aside my containers of leftovers and the vegetables I'd bought on sale at Morrison's grocery. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Dash," she called toward the stairs. "There's no organization in this kitchen. We need to completely reorganize the fridge and the pantry. It's chaos in here." Chaos. My kitchen, where I'd cooked thousands of meals, where I'd always known exactly where everything was apparently chaos. Dashiell appeared in the doorway, also dressed for the gym in expensive workout clothes I'd never seen before. He must have bought an entire new wardrobe since Sienna moved in. "Morning, Mom," he said absently, already looking at his phone. "Good morning, sweetheart," I replied, using the endearment deliberately, reminding him, though he probably didn't care, that I was his mother, not just some elderly roommate named Margaret. "Dash, we need to talk about the household situation," Sienna said, finally giving up on finding her juice and turning to face both of us. "I've been making a list of changes we need to implement to make this living arrangement work better." "Changes?" I asked carefully, setting down my coffee cup. "Yes, changes." Sienna pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a notes app. "First, we need to establish a better system for the kitchen. I'm thinking we should designate certain shelves in the fridge and pantry as ours, and certain shelves as yours, Margaret. That way there's no confusion about food." "This is my house," I said quietly. "All the shelves are mine. You're welcome to use them, but they're not yours to designate." Sienna's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "That seems a bit territorial, don't you think? We're all living here together." "You moved into my house 10 days ago," I pointed out, my voice still calm but with an edge creeping in. "I've lived here for 35 years. I bought every appliance in this kitchen. I chose every pot and pan. This is my home that I'm sharing with you, not a shared living space where we all have equal claim." Dashiell looked up from his phone, frowning. "Mom, don't start. Sienna's just trying to help organize things better. I don't need help organizing my own kitchen." "Changes?" I asked carefully, setting down my coffee cup. "Yes, changes." Sienna pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a notes app. "First, we need to establish a better system for the kitchen. I'm thinking we should designate certain shelves in the fridge and pantry as ours, and certain shelves as yours, Margaret. That way there's no confusion about food." "This is my house," I said quietly. "All the shelves are mine. You're welcome to use them, but they're not yours to designate." Sienna's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "That seems a bit territorial, don't you think? We're all living here together. You moved into my house 10 days ago, I pointed out, my voice still calm but with an edge creeping in. I've lived here for 35 years. I bought every appliance in this kitchen. I chose every pot and pan. This is my home that I'm sharing with you, not a shared living space where we all have equal claim. Dashiell looked up from his phone, frowning. Mom, don't start. Sienna's just trying to help organize things better. I don't need help organizing my own kitchen. Clearly you do, Sienna interjected, her voice taking on that particular tone of patient condescension that made my teeth clench. No offense, Margaret, but your system is outdated and inefficient. I've been a lifestyle influencer for 3 years. I know about optimal home organization. You've been unemployed for 2 weeks, I corrected. Before that, you worked in social media marketing for a startup that went out of business. That doesn't make you an expert on how I should organize my own kitchen. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Sienna's face flushed red. Excuse me? You heard me. I was surprised by how steady my voice was, how calm I felt even as I said things I'd been thinking for days but never dared to speak. You quit your job 2 weeks ago because you decided it was beneath you. Now you spend your days taking photos of your breakfast and calling it work. That doesn't give you the authority to come into my home and tell me how to organize my kitchen. Mom. Dashiell's voice was sharp with warning. That's completely uncalled for. Is it? I turned to face my son. She's been living in my house for 10 days. She's taken over my bedroom, my bathroom, my kitchen table for her content creation. She's told me when I can and cannot use my own kitchen. She's criticized my cooking, my belongings, my entire life. And I'm supposed to just smile and accept it because you're dating her? We're not just dating, Dashiell said coldly. We're building a life together. And yes, that means Sienna has a say in how this household runs. Not in my household, she doesn't. The words hung in the air between us. I watched my son's face transform from surprise to anger, his jaw tightening in that way it always did when he wasn't getting what he wanted. What exactly are you saying? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. This was it. The moment of truth. I could back down now, apologize, go back to being invisible and accommodating. Or I could stand my ground. I thought about what I'd overheard last night. About them discussing my death like it was an inconvenient delay. About their plan to make me so uncomfortable that I'd leave my own home. I straightened my shoulders and met my son's eyes. I'm saying that I've been too accommodating. I gave up my bedroom without complaint. I've tolerated being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. I've watched you take over my space and my life without saying a word. But that ends now. Wow, Sienna said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Someone woke up on the wrong side of the guest room bed this morning. Sienna, I'm going to say something to you very clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. I turned to face her directly. This is my house. My name is on the deed. I pay the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities, the mortgage. Oh wait, there is no mortgage because I paid it off through 15 years of working 2 jobs after my husband died. You contribute nothing except attitude and entitlement. Her mouth fell open in shock. Clearly, no one had ever spoken to her this way before. How dare you, she began, but I wasn't finished. I dare because it's the truth. You've been here less than 2 weeks and you've already tried to erase every trace of me from my own home. You've taken my bedroom, criticized my belongings, dismissed my preferences, and treated me like I'm some elderly burden you're generously tolerating. Well, I'm not a burden. This is my house, and you're here because I've allowed it. Mom, that's enough. Dashiell's face was red now, his voice rising. You're being incredibly rude to my girlfriend. And you've been incredibly disrespectful to your mother, I shot back. When did that change, Dashiell? When did I go from being the woman who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you, to being someone whose feelings don't matter? Someone who can be pushed aside and dismissed. Oh my God, here we go with the martyr routine, Sienna muttered, rolling her eyes. The "I sacrificed everything for you" speech. Classic guilt trip. Something inside me snapped. Get out, I said. Both of them stared at me. What? Dashiell asked. I said get out. Out of my kitchen. Out of my sight. I can't look at either of you right now without feeling disgusted. This is ridiculous, Sienna said, grabbing Dashiell's arm. Come on, babe. Let's go to the gym. Your mother is clearly having some kind of episode. They left, but not before Sienna shot me a look of pure hatred over her shoulder. I heard them gathering their things, heard the front door slam, heard Dashiell's car start and pull out of the driveway. And then I was alone in my kitchen, shaking like a leaf, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs and put my head in my hands. What had I just done? I'd confronted them, stood up for myself, said all the things I'd been thinking but never dared to voice. And it had felt good. Terrifying, but good. But I also knew that I'd just declared war. There was no going back from this. Things were going to get worse before they got better. I was right. They returned 3 hours later, and from the moment they walked through the door, I could feel the shift in energy. They didn't speak to me. They walked past me in the hallway as if I wasn't there. When I tried to say hello, Dashiell looked straight through me like I was invisible. This was their strategy, then. The silent treatment. Pretending I didn't exist. That evening, I made myself dinner, a simple pasta with vegetables, and ate alone in the kitchen while they ordered takeout from some expensive Thai restaurant and took it upstairs to their room. I heard them laughing up there, their voices deliberately loud, as if they wanted me to know how much fun they were having without me. The next day was worse. I came into the living room to find that they'd rearranged all the furniture. The couch where I always sat, positioned to catch the afternoon light from the window, had been moved to the opposite wall. My reading chair, the one Marcus had given me for our 20th anniversary, had been pushed into a corner. The coffee table I'd refinished myself had been replaced with some modern glass thing I'd never seen before. What happened to my furniture? I asked Sienna, who was arranging throw pillows on the repositioned couch. She looked up at me with exaggerated innocence. Oh, we're redecorating. The old layout was so dated. Don't you think this is better? More feng shui approved. You can't just rearrange my furniture without asking. Can't I? She smiled sweetly. Dash said we should make the space more us. You're welcome to use the living room, of course, but we're the ones who spend the most time here, so it makes sense that it should reflect our taste. Where's my coffee table? The wooden one that was here? Oh, that old thing? Dash put it in the garage. It didn't match the new aesthetic we're going for. That old thing was a solid oak table I'd spent 3 weekends refinishing, sanding away years of scratches and water rings, applying layer after layer of stain and varnish until it gleamed. It had been my project, my accomplishment, my pride. And they'd put it in the garage like it was trash. I walked out to the garage and found it there, shoved in a corner behind some boxes, already collecting dust. I ran my hand over its surface, feeling the smooth wood under my fingers, and had to blink back tears. When I came back inside, I found Dashiell in the kitchen, making himself a protein shake with ingredients I knew I hadn't bought, which meant he'd gone shopping and brought back food without telling me. Dashiell, we need to talk, I said. He looked at me with the same blank expression he'd been wearing since our argument. I don't have anything to say to you, Mother. Mother. Not Mom. The formal distance of that word felt like a slap. Your girlfriend is rearranging my house without permission. She threw out my coffee table. She didn't throw it out. She put it in the garage. And it's not just your house anymore. Sienna and I live here too. We should have some say in how the common areas look. You've lived here for 2 weeks. And we plan to live here a lot longer. He took a drink of his shake and looked at me with something that might have been pity. Maybe you should think about whether this arrangement is really working for you, Mom. Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Somewhere designed for people your age, where you don't have to worry about household decisions or keeping up with the needs of younger people. There it was. Just like I'd heard them planning last night, the subtle suggestion that I should leave my own home. Is that what you want? I asked quietly. For me to leave? He had the grace to look uncomfortable for a moment. I want what's best for everyone. And right now, there's a lot of tension in this house. It's not healthy. There's tension because your girlfriend is taking over my home and you're allowing it. Or there's tension because you're being inflexible and resistant to change, he countered. You're 70 years old, Mom. Maybe it's time to accept that you can't control everything anymore. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, who'd once looked at me like I hung the moon, and barely recognized him. "Get out of my kitchen," I said softly. "It's not just your kitchen." "Yes, Dashiell, it is. It's my kitchen in my house that I paid for with my money. And I want you out of it. Now." He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head like I was a difficult child. "You're being unreasonable. Sienna was right about you." He left, taking his shake with him. I stood there alone, my hands gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. That night, I barely slept again. I lay in the guest room bed, listening to them move around above me, and realized with crystal clarity what was happening. They were waging psychological warfare. Every furniture rearrangement, every dismissive comment, every cold shoulder was designed to make me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to be the one to leave, so they could tell everyone that it had been my choice, that they'd done nothing wrong. But I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight back. The next morning, I got up early again. I made my coffee and returned to my laptop, but this time I wasn't researching property law. I was making a plan. If they wanted to play games, I would play too. But I would play smarter. I started by documenting everything. I took photos of the rearranged living room, the displaced furniture in the garage, the way they'd taken over the master bedroom. I began keeping a journal, writing down every incident, every conversation, every slight. Then I made some phone calls. The first was to my sister Vivian in Sacramento. We'd never been particularly close. She'd moved to California 30 years ago and we maybe talked 3 or 4 times a year, but she was family, and I needed someone to know what was happening. "Margaret?" Her voice was surprised when she answered. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said honestly. "Everything is not okay. And I need to tell you what's been happening." I spent the next hour telling her everything, about Dashiell moving Sienna in without asking, about being forced out of my bedroom, about the overheard conversation planning to push me out of my home, about the escalating tensions and the way they were trying to make me feel like an intruder in my own house. Vivian was silent for a long moment when I finished. Then she said, "That son of a bitch." "Vivian." "No, Margaret, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what he is." "After everything you did for him? After you sacrificed your entire life to raise him? This is how he treats you?" "I don't know what to do," I admitted, and my voice broke. "I feel like I'm losing my mind. They make me feel like I'm being unreasonable, like I'm the problem." "You're not the problem. They're financially and emotionally abusing you. They're trying to steal your house." Vivian's voice was firm. "Margaret, you need to protect yourself. You need to document everything and you need to consider getting them out of there. He's my son. He's a grown man who's trying to manipulate his elderly mother out of her home so he can inherit it faster. That's not a son. That's a vulture." The harsh words hurt because they were true. "What should I do?" I asked. "First, you need to talk to a lawyer. Find out what your rights are, what your options are. Second, you need to consider whether you want to keep fighting to live with them, or whether you want to evict them and reclaim your peace." "I can't evict my own son." "Can't, or won't." I didn't have an answer to that. After I hung up with Vivian, I sat for a long time staring at my coffee. Could I really evict my own child? Could I really take legal action against Dashiell? The answer came when I heard Sienna's laugh from upstairs, followed by Dashiell's voice saying something I couldn't make out, and then both of them laughing together. They were probably laughing about me. About the stubborn old woman who wouldn't get out of their way. Yes. If it came to that, I could. But first, I needed more information. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. That afternoon, while they were out, they'd taken to leaving the house for hours at a time, probably to avoid me. I did something I'd never done before. Something that would have been unthinkable to the Margaret I'd been just 2 weeks ago. I searched their room. I felt guilty as I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, my heart pounding. I felt like a criminal as I carefully opened the door. But I pushed past the guilt. They'd invaded my space, taken over my home. It was time I found out exactly what I was dealing with. I started with the obvious places, the dresser drawers, the closet. Sienna had already taken over 3/4 of the closet space, her clothes arranged by color like a retail display. Dashiell's things were crammed into one corner. In Sienna's nightstand drawer, I found her journal. I hesitated only for a moment before opening it. What I read there made my blood boil. Entry after entry detailing her strategy for taking over my house. She'd written about it like it was a game, a challenge to be won. Week 1, secured master bedroom. M didn't even fight, just accepted it. Easier than expected. Week 2, establishing dominance in common areas. Kitchen table is mine for content creation. M is learning her place. The key is making her feel uncomfortable without being obvious about it. Death by 1,000 cuts. Eventually she'll leave on her own and we won't have to be the bad guys. There was more. Pages and pages of manipulation tactics, observation about my routines that she could disrupt, ideas for making me feel unwelcome. It was all there, written in her neat handwriting with little hearts dotting the I's. And then I found the worst entry, dated just 2 days ago. Dash is finally on board with the full plan. He was worried about looking bad, but I convinced him that we're actually helping her by encouraging her to move somewhere more appropriate for her age. We figure another month or 2 of making things uncomfortable and she'll start looking at senior apartments. The house will be ours by spring. His inheritance just needs a little acceleration. I took photos of the journal pages with my phone, my hands shaking with rage. But I wasn't done yet. I kept searching, and in a box at the back of the closet, a box that had once held my winter sweaters, I found something that made everything click into place. Real estate brochures. Lots of them. For houses in the expensive neighborhood across town, places that cost $500,000 or more. Places that Dashiell and Sienna couldn't possibly afford on his salary alone. Unless they sold my house. There were also printouts of property value estimates for my address. Someone, probably Dashiell, had gotten a formal appraisal done. My house, the one I'd bought for $180,000 35 years ago and had paid off completely, was now worth $520,000. $500,000. That's what my home represented to them. That's what I represented, an obstacle standing between them and a substantial windfall. I photographed everything, then carefully put it all back exactly as I'd found it. I left the room and closed the door behind me, my mind racing. They weren't just being cruel. They weren't just being inconsiderate. They had an actual plan to steal my house, and they'd been implementing it systematically since the day Sienna moved in. I went back to my guest room and sat on the bed, looking at the photos on my phone. This was evidence. This was proof of their intentions. But what was I going to do with it? I could confront them with it, but they'd just deny it or make excuses. I could kick them out right now, but that would lead to a family rupture that might never heal. Or I could use this information strategically, the way they'd been using their plan strategically against me. As I sat there, staring at the photos of Sienna's journal and those real estate brochures, I felt the last piece of my old self fall away. The mother who'd always put her son first, who'd always chosen peace over conflict, who'd always swallowed her hurt rather than cause a scene, she was gone. What remained was a woman who'd been backed into a corner and had finally decided to come out fighting. They wanted to play games. They wanted to manipulate and scheme. They wanted to treat me like I was already dead and my house was already theirs. Fine. But they were about to learn that Margaret Catherine Hartley wasn't as helpless as they thought. I had evidence of their plan. I had documentation of their behavior. I had proof that they were trying to financially exploit an elderly homeowner. And most importantly, I had something they'd forgotten about. I had the deed to this house. I had the power. I had control. They just didn't know it yet. I stood up from the bed and looked at myself in the guest room mirror. I looked different. Older, yes, but also stronger. More determined. There was a hardness in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Okay, I said to my reflection. Let's see how you like the game when I start playing by your rules. I had work to do. Phone calls to make. Plans to set in motion. And when I was done, Dashiell and Sienna were going to regret the day they decided to underestimate me. The war they'd started was about to escalate. But this time, I was going to be the one controlling the battlefield. The Monday morning after I'd discovered Sienna's journal and the real estate brochures, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. I got dressed carefully, choosing a pair of navy slacks and a cream-colored blouse instead of my usual jeans and sweater. If I was going to take control of my situation, I needed to look like someone who meant business. My first stop was the Riverside County Public Library on Elmwood Avenue. I'd been a regular patron for years, and the head librarian, Patricia Chin, greeted me warmly when I walked through the glass doors at exactly 9 a.m. "Margaret. We haven't seen you in a few weeks." I was starting to worry, Patricia said, her reading glasses perched on top of her gray curls. "I've been dealing with some family matters," I said carefully. "Actually, I need to use one of the computers for some research." "Legal research." Patricia's smile faded slightly, replaced by concern. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Can you help me access the legal databases? I need to look up some information about property law and elder rights." She set me up at a computer in the quiet corner of the library and showed me how to access the Oregon State Bar Association's Legal Resources page. "If you need help navigating anything, just let me know," she said. "And Margaret? Whatever you're dealing with, I hope it works out." I spent the next 4 hours immersed in legal documents and statutes. I learned about Oregon's landlord-tenant laws, about how even family members living in your home could be considered tenants if they'd been there long enough. I read about eviction procedures, about the formal notices required, about the timelines involved. But more importantly, I researched elder abuse laws. Oregon took financial exploitation of vulnerable adults seriously. The statutes defined it as the wrongful taking or appropriating of money or property of a person 65 years or older. It included situations where someone used deception, intimidation, or undue influence to gain control of an elderly person's assets. What Dashiell and Sienna were doing, systematically trying to push me out of my own home so they could inherit it faster, potentially fell under these statutes. I printed out copies of the most relevant laws and tucked them into my purse. Then I moved on to my next research topic, property values and selling procedures. If the worst came to worst, if I decided I really couldn't live with them anymore, what were my options? I could sell the house, yes. But then where would I go? I pulled up real estate listings for Riverside and the surrounding areas, looking at what $520,000 could buy me now versus what I could rent for my Social Security income of $1,850 per month. The numbers were sobering. Housing prices had skyrocketed since I'd bought my home in 1990. A comparable 3-bedroom house now cost upwards of $450,000. Even a small condo or townhouse was $300,000 or more. And rental apartments? The decent ones were $1,400 to $1,800 per month, almost my entire Social Security check. I sat back in the library chair, feeling a wave of frustration. Even if I sold my house, I'd be trading a fully paid-off home for either a new mortgage at 70 years old or rental payments that would consume my fixed income. Dashiell and Sienna weren't just trying to steal my home, they were trying to steal my financial security, my independence, my entire future. That realization hardened my resolve even further. By the time I left the library at 1:30 p.m., I had a folder full of printed information and a much clearer understanding of my legal position. I also had a list of phone numbers, legal aid organizations, elder advocacy groups, and 3 real estate attorneys who specialized in property disputes. But before I made any calls to lawyers, I needed to gather more evidence. I needed to document not just what I'd found in their room, but everything they were doing to make my life uncomfortable. I stopped at Brennan's office supply on Riverside Avenue and bought a small notebook with a lock on it, the kind teenage girls use for diaries. Then I drove to Carrington's Electronics and purchased something I never thought I'd need, a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a USB drive. This model is very popular with students who record lectures, the young salesman told me, demonstrating how to use it. It has 12 hours of recording capacity and the audio quality is excellent. Perfect, I said, not mentioning that I planned to use it to record my own son if he said anything incriminating. My last stop was at Morrison's Grocery, where I bought ingredients for a proper dinner. Not because I planned to cook for Dashiell and Sienna, but because I'd been so stressed lately that I'd barely been eating. It was time to take care of myself, to remember that regardless of what they were doing, I still deserved to nourish my body and maintain my health. I arrived back home at 3:15 p.m. to find Dashiell's car in the driveway. My stomach clenched. I'd hoped to have a few more hours alone to organize my thoughts and start my documentation process. When I walked in through the front door, I found them in the living room, my living room that they'd rearranged. Sienna was on the couch with her laptop, and Dashiell was in my reading chair, which they'd moved from its corner back to a semi-prominent position. So they did occasionally use it, just not where I'd had it placed. "You're home," Dashiell said, stating the obvious. His tone was neutral, not hostile but not warm either. "I live here," I replied evenly, heading toward the kitchen with my grocery bags. "We need to talk to you about something," Sienna called after me, not bothering to get up or even close her laptop. I set my bags on the kitchen counter and returned to the living room doorway. "What is it?" Dashiell stood up, and I noticed he was holding some papers. "We've been thinking about the household finances," he began, and my internal alarm bell started ringing. "Now that Sienna and I are living here permanently, we think it's only fair that we contribute to the household expenses." This was unexpected. I'd assumed they were content to live here rent-free while planning to eventually take the house. What were they playing at? "That's not necessary," I said carefully. "This is my home. I've been managing the expenses for 35 years. "But it's not fair to you," Sienna said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're on a fixed income, and we're both working adults." "Well, Dash is working, and I'll be earning income from my influencer business soon. We should help with utilities and groceries and things. I appreciate the offer, but I'm managing fine." "Mom, we insist." Dashiell held out the papers. "We've drawn up a proposed agreement. We'll pay you $800 per month to cover our share of utilities, internet, food, and household expenses. It's the least we can do." I took the papers from him, my mind racing. $800 a month was substantial. It would be nearly half my Social Security check. But why were they offering this? What was the catch? I scanned the document quickly, and there it was, buried in the third paragraph. "In exchange for monthly payments as specified above, residents Dashiell Hartley and Sienna Cruz shall have equal say in household decisions, including but not limited to, furniture arrangement, decoration choices, meal planning, and use of common areas." Equal say. They wanted to use money to buy the right to control my home. "This isn't necessary," I repeated, handing the papers back to Dashiell. "I don't need your money, and I'm not signing any agreement that gives you control over my household decisions." "It's not about control," Dashiell said, and I could hear the edge creeping into his voice. "It's about fairness. We're adults living here, not children. We should have a voice. You have a voice. You're welcome to make suggestions. But this is my home, and I'm not signing away my authority over it. Why are you being so stubborn about this?" Sienna stood up now, closing her laptop with a sharp click. "We're literally trying to help you financially, and you're acting like we're trying to steal from you." The irony of her words, given what I'd found hidden in her closet, was almost funny. Almost. "I don't need help," I said firmly. "And I'm not signing any agreement. If you want to contribute to groceries occasionally, that's fine, but there's not going to be any formal arrangement." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Sienna said, turning to Dashiell. "She refuses to be reasonable. She refuses to treat us like equals. How are we supposed to build a life here when she controls everything?" "You're not building a life here," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "You're guests in my home. And until you understand that distinction, we're going to keep having these problems." I walked back to the kitchen before either of them could respond, my heart pounding. I heard them talking in low, angry voices in the living room, but I couldn't make out the words. I put away my groceries with shaking hands, then pulled out the small notebook I'd bought and began writing down what had just happened, including direct quotes as best as I could remember them. This was evidence. This whole conversation about the agreement was part of their strategy to gain legal standing in my house. If I'd signed that document, they could potentially argue that they were paying tenants with rights, making it harder for me to remove them if necessary. I was learning to think like them, to see the manipulation behind every gesture, to question every seemingly generous offer. That evening, I made myself a proper dinner, baked salmon with roasted vegetables and a side salad. I set the table in the kitchen with real dishes, not paper plates. I poured myself a glass of the wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, a bottle of Pinot Grigio from a winery in the Willamette Valley that my sister had sent me for Christmas 2 years ago. If they could enjoy their expensive Thai takeout in the master bedroom, I could enjoy a civilized meal in my own kitchen. I was halfway through my salmon when Dashiell appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, just watching me, and I continued eating without acknowledging him. "That smells good," he finally said. "Thank you. Did you make extra?" I looked at him levelly. "No. I made dinner for one. If you're hungry, there are leftovers in the fridge you're welcome to." He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, can we talk? Without Sienna?" This surprised me. In the 3 weeks since Sienna had moved in, Dashiell had barely spoken to me except in her presence or in support of her positions. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat, and for a moment he looked like my son again, not the cold stranger who'd been occupying my house, but the boy I'd raised. There was uncertainty in his eyes, maybe even a trace of guilt. "I know things have been tense," he began. "That's an understatement. I want you to understand that we're not trying to push you out or make you uncomfortable. We're just trying to establish ourselves as a couple, to have some autonomy in our living situation." I set down my fork and looked at him. "Dashiell, do you remember what you said to me when you were 10 years old and you wanted to go to that expensive summer camp?" He frowned, clearly not understanding the relevance. "No. You said, 'Mom, I know it costs a lot, but I promise when I grow up, I'll take care of you the way you took care of me.' Do you remember that?" His face flushed slightly. "Mom, I was 10. Yes, you were. And I didn't hold you to that promise. I never expected you to take care of me. I never expected anything from you except basic respect and consideration. But this?" I gestured around the kitchen. "This isn't respect. This is you and your girlfriend systematically trying to take over my home and push me into a corner." "That's not." "Yes, it is." I kept my voice calm, but firm. "You moved her in without asking me. You took my bedroom. You've rearranged my furniture, dismissed my preferences, ignored my feelings, and treated me like an inconvenience in my own house. And today you tried to get me to sign an agreement that would give you legal rights to control my household. The agreement was about fairness. The agreement was about establishing yourselves as legal tenants with equal say, which would make it much harder for me to ask you to leave if things don't work out. I'm not stupid, Dashiell. I understand what you're trying to do." He stared at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much I'd figured out. "I don't know what Sienna has told you," I continued, "or what plans you two have made together. But I want you to hear this clearly, I am not going anywhere. This is my house. I paid for it with my own money, with years of sacrifice and hard work. And I'm not letting anyone, not even my own son, manipulate me out of it." "Nobody's trying to manipulate you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it. Stop trying to control everything. Stop treating me like I'm in the way. Start treating me like your mother, like someone who deserves respect in her own home." He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Sienna's voice called down from upstairs, "Dash. Can you come help me with something?" He stood up immediately, like a dog responding to his master's call. "We'll talk more later," he said, already heading toward the stairs. "Will we?" I asked, but he was already gone. I finished my dinner alone, as I'd expected. But the conversation had given me valuable information. Dashiell was uncomfortable with what they were doing, not uncomfortable enough to stop, but uncomfortable nonetheless. That guilt, that uncertainty, might be useful later. After cleaning up my dishes, I retired to the guest room and pulled out my locked notebook. I documented the conversation, including Dashiell's body language and tone. Then I recorded every detail of the day, the library research, the attempted agreement, the evening confrontation. I was building a timeline, creating a record of their systematic attempt to take control of my home. The next morning, Tuesday, I woke up early and immediately checked the master bedroom door. They were still asleep. I'd noticed over the past weeks that neither of them was an early riser. They typically didn't emerge until 9 o'clock or 10 a.m. This gave me unsupervised time in the house, and I intended to use it. I made coffee quietly, then positioned myself at the kitchen table with my laptop. I decided it was time to start making some strategic inquiries. I needed to understand my options, to know what I could do if I decided to take action. My first email was to the Riverside County Legal Aid Society, explaining my situation in general terms. A 70-year-old homeowner whose adult son and his girlfriend had moved in and were attempting to gain control of the property. I asked about consultation services and what legal protections might be available to me. My second email was to the Oregon Department of Human Services, Adult Protective Services Division. I didn't file a formal complaint, not yet, but I requested information about what constituted financial exploitation of vulnerable adults and what resources were available. My third email was to a real estate attorney whose name I'd found in my library research, Catherine Morales, who specialized in elder law and property disputes. I outlined my situation more fully and asked about the possibility of a consultation. By 8:30 a.m., I'd sent all 3 emails and was feeling both anxious and empowered. I was taking action. I was protecting myself. I was no longer passively accepting what they were doing to me. I heard movement upstairs, the shower running in the master bathroom. They'd be down soon. I closed my laptop and put it away in my room, then returned to the kitchen to start on my own breakfast. Sienna came down first, dressed in another expensive athleisure outfit, her hair in a messy bun that probably took 15 minutes to achieve. She ignored me completely, going straight to the refrigerator and pulling out one of her organic juice bottles. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. She gave me a look that could freeze water and walked out of the kitchen without responding. Fine. If she wanted to play the silent treatment game, I could handle that. Dashiell came down 20 minutes later, dressed for work in slacks and a button-down shirt. He grabbed his travel mug from the cabinet and poured coffee from the pot I'd made, still not speaking to me. I watched him add cream and sugar, watched him check his phone, watched him exist in my kitchen as if I weren't even there. "I'm making scrambled eggs," I said. "Would you like some?" He looked up, surprised. Sure. Yeah. Thank you." It was the first almost normal interaction we'd had in days. I made eggs for both of us, and we sat at the table together in awkward silence. I could feel him wanting to say something, but not knowing how to begin. "Mom," he finally said, "about yesterday." "It's fine," I interrupted. "Let's just eat breakfast." We ate. He finished quickly, rinsed his plate, and grabbed his briefcase. "I'll be home late tonight. We have a client dinner." "We?" I asked. "Sienna's coming with me. The client is bringing his wife, so Sienna offered to join us to balance out the numbers." So Sienna, who was unemployed and had no connection to Dashiell's company, was now attending his business dinners as if she were his wife. I wondered if his company knew she was just his girlfriend, or if he was presenting her as something more official. After they left, Dashiell to his office downtown, Sienna to wherever she went during the day, probably the gym or various coffee shops to take Instagram photos, I had the house completely to myself. I immediately went back upstairs to the master bedroom. I felt less guilty about searching their space this time. They'd forfeited their right to privacy when they'd started plotting to steal my home. I went straight to the closet and pulled out the box that contained the real estate brochures. Everything was still there, but now I took my time examining each document more carefully. There were notes in Dashiell's handwriting on several of the property listings. Good location, he'd written on a modern craftsman in the Westridge neighborhood. Perfect for our needs, was scrawled on a listing for a contemporary two-story near the new shopping district. But what caught my attention was a folder I hadn't noticed before, tucked under the brochures. Inside were financial documents, a pre-approval letter from Riverside Community Bank for a mortgage of up to $300,000, contingent on a down payment of at least $150,000. My hands started shaking as I did the math. If they sold my house for $520,000 and used $150,000 as a down payment, they'd have $370,000 left over. More than enough to pay off any debts, furnish their new house, and have a comfortable cushion. They'd thought this through. They'd planned it in detail. They'd even gone so far as to get pre-approved for a mortgage based on money they didn't have yet, money they planned to steal from me. I photographed every document, making sure to capture all of Dashiell's handwritten notes. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and left the room. Back in my guest room, I transferred all the photos from my phone to my laptop and organized them into folders: financial documents, journal entries, property research. I backed everything up to a USB drive that I then hid in the back of my closet, inside an old purse I never used. If they ever discovered I'd been gathering evidence and tried to delete it from my phone or computer, I'd still have the backup. I spent the rest of the morning continuing my documentation. I went through my bank records and printed out statements showing that I alone paid for all household expenses, property taxes, insurance, utilities, internet, groceries. If they ever tried to claim they'd been contributing financially or had some kind of tenant rights, I'd have proof they'd been living here completely free. By lunchtime, I'd compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence. I had photos of Sienna's journal detailing their manipulation tactics, photos of the real estate brochures and property searches, financial documents showing their mortgage pre-approval, bank statements proving I paid all household expenses, a detailed timeline of events with dates and specific incidents, copies of relevant Oregon laws regarding elder exploitation, my own journal documenting daily interactions and their behavior. It was enough to take to a lawyer. It was enough to build a case if I needed one. But I still hadn't decided what I wanted to do. Did I want to fight to stay in my house with them? Did I want to evict them? Did I want to sell the house myself and move somewhere else? The uncertainty was eating at me. That afternoon, I received a response to one of my morning emails. Catherine Morales, the real estate attorney, had written back. Dear Mrs. Hartley, thank you for reaching out. Based on your description, you may have several legal options available to you. I'd like to schedule a consultation to discuss your situation in detail. I have an opening this Thursday at 2 p.m. if that works for your schedule. Please know that initial consultations are free for seniors, and we offer sliding scale fees based on income for ongoing representation. You are not alone, and there are protections in place for homeowners in your situation. I read the email 3 times, feeling tears prick at my eyes. You are not alone. Such simple words, but they meant everything. I wrote back immediately, confirming the Thursday appointment. I had taken the first real step toward fighting back. I had gathered evidence, documented everything, and now I was going to talk to a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Dashiell and Sienna thought they were so clever, thought they were slowly maneuvering me into a position where I'd have no choice but to leave. They thought I was just a helpless old woman who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea what was coming. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. That evening, when they came home from Dashiell's business dinner, I was sitting in the living room reading a book. They were laughing as they came through the door, clearly in good spirits. The dinner went great, Dashiell was saying. Mr. Thornton loved your stories about your influencer work. He said his company might even be interested in hiring you for some social media consulting. See? Sienna's voice was smug. I told you I'd be an asset to your career, not a liability. They walked past me without saying hello, heading straight for the stairs. "Oh, Margaret," Sienna paused on the bottom step and looked back at me. "We're having some friends over this Saturday for dinner. You might want to make plans to be out of the house. We need the space for entertaining." "This is my house," I said calmly, not looking up from my book. "I'm not going anywhere. It would just be easier if..." "No." Sienna's eyes narrowed. "You're going to be difficult about this too?" "I'm not being difficult. I'm simply not leaving my own home because you want to throw a party." "Dash, do you hear this?" Dashiell sighed, looking tired. "Mom, can't you just be flexible for one evening? We're trying to build our social life here. Build it around me being here, then. Or find somewhere else to host your party." They went upstairs without another word, and I heard their voices raised in argument through the ceiling. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Sienna was angry, and Dashiell was caught in the middle. Good. Let them be uncomfortable for once. Let them be the ones who had to adapt and compromise. I marked my place in my book and went to my room. I pulled out my notebook and recorded the interaction. Then I added a note: "They're planning a party for Saturday. They wanted me to leave my own house. I refused." Every interaction, every attempt to control me, every dismissal of my rights, it was all going in the record. And on Thursday, I'd show it all to Catherine Morales and find out exactly what my options were. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the guest room mirror again. I looked different than I had 3 weeks ago. There was something harder in my eyes, something more determined in the set of my jaw. I was no longer Margaret the doormat, Margaret the endlessly patient mother, Margaret who always put everyone else first. I was Margaret the fighter. Margaret the survivor. Margaret who'd been pushed too far and was finally pushing back. And Dashiell and Sienna were about to find out just how much trouble they'd created for themselves when they decided to mess with a 70-year-old woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Thursday arrived with a mix of anxiety and anticipation coursing through my veins. I woke at dawn, unable to sleep any longer, my mind racing with thoughts of the 2 p.m. appointment with Catherine Morales. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a charcoal gray pantsuit I'd bought 5 years ago for a retirement party at Brennan & Associates. I wanted to look competent, serious, like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. I gathered all my evidence into a leather portfolio case: the printed photos of Sienna's journal, the real estate documents, the financial records, my own detailed timeline. Everything organized with labeled tabs, professional and thorough. Dashiell had already left for work by the time I emerged from my room at 7:30. Sienna was still asleep upstairs. She rarely surfaced before 10 o'clock. I made myself a simple breakfast of toast and tea, too nervous to eat much, and sat at the kitchen table reviewing my notes one more time. At 1:15 p.m., I left the house and drove downtown to the address Catherine Morales had provided, a modest office building on 3rd Street, not far from the courthouse. The law office of Morales & Associates was on the 3rd floor, a small suite with comfortable waiting room furniture and walls lined with legal books. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Hartley? Ms. Morales is ready for you. Please, come this way." Catherine Morales was a woman in her mid-50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She stood to shake my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Mrs. Hartley, please have a seat. Can I get you some water or coffee?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." Once we were both settled, Catherine opened a fresh legal pad and looked at me with an expression of professional concern. "Why don't you tell me, in your own words, what's been happening?" And so I did. I told her everything, starting from the day Dashiell announced he was moving Sienna into my home without asking, through the bedroom takeover, the escalating disrespect, the overheard midnight conversation about my death, and the discovery of their detailed plans to manipulate me out of my house. I showed her every piece of evidence I'd gathered, and she examined each document carefully, occasionally making notes. When I finished, nearly 45 minutes later, Catherine set down her pen and looked at me with a mixture of anger and compassion. "Mrs. Hartley, what your son and his girlfriend are doing constitutes elder abuse under Oregon law. Specifically, financial exploitation and emotional abuse. The fact that they've documented their intentions in writing, she tapped Sienna's journal photos, makes this an exceptionally strong case. What are my options? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Several. First, you have the absolute right to evict them from your property. They're not on the lease, they're not paying rent in any formal arrangement, and you never entered into any rental agreement with them. In Oregon, you can evict family members who are living with you rent-free with a simple 30-day notice. 30 days? It seemed both impossibly long and remarkably short. Yes. You'd serve them with a written notice to vacate within 30 days. If they refuse to leave after that period, you can file for a formal eviction with the court, which typically takes another 2 to 3 weeks. So realistically, you're looking at 6 to 7 weeks maximum before they're legally required to be out. And if they refuse to leave even then? Then the sheriff's office physically removes them. But it rarely comes to that. Most people leave once they understand there are legal consequences. Catherine paused. However, there's another option that might be faster and more definitive. I leaned forward. What is it? Given the evidence of financial exploitation and their documented plan to essentially steal your property, you could file for a restraining order based on elder abuse. If granted, they'd have to leave immediately, within 24 hours. Number 30-day waiting period. My heart started racing. Would a judge grant that? With this evidence? Almost certainly. You have documentation of their intent to harm you financially, to manipulate you out of your home, to exploit your death for monetary gain. Any judge who sees Sienna's journal entries and that mortgage pre-approval will understand exactly what's happening here. But Dashiell is my son, I said, voicing the fear that had been holding me back. If I do this, our relationship might never recover. Catherine's expression softened. Mrs. Hartley, I need you to hear this. Your son is already choosing his relationship with his girlfriend over his relationship with you. He's already participating in a scheme to steal your home. The question isn't whether taking legal action will damage your relationship. The question is whether you're willing to protect yourself from people who are actively trying to harm you, regardless of biology. Her words hit me like cold water. She was right. I'd been so caught up in the idea that Dashiell was my son, my child, that I'd been making excuses for behavior I would never tolerate from anyone else. What do I need to do? I asked. We file a petition for a restraining order based on elder abuse. We include all of this evidence. We request an emergency hearing, which we'll likely get within 3 to 5 days given the circumstances. You testify about what's been happening, we present the evidence, and unless I'm very much mistaken, the judge will grant the order and give them 24 hours to vacate the premises. And then? And then you change the locks, you take back your home, and you live in peace. Whether or not you ever reconcile with your son is up to you and him, but it will be on your terms, not under conditions of exploitation and abuse. I sat there for a long moment, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. This was it, the decision point. I could continue trying to coexist with them, hoping things would somehow improve, or I could take decisive action to protect myself and my home. I thought about lying in that guest room bed, listening to them laugh about me above. I thought about Sienna's journal entries calling me M and discussing strategic household management. I thought about my son discussing my death like it was a minor inconvenience delaying his real estate plans. Let's do it, I said. File the petition. Catherine smiled, not a happy smile, but a satisfied one. Good. You're making the right choice. I'll start preparing the paperwork this afternoon. Can you come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. to review and sign everything? Yes. Absolutely. And Mrs. Hartley? Until this is resolved, I want you to be very careful. Don't confront them about what you're doing. Don't give them any indication that you're taking legal action. We want the restraining order to be a surprise. If they know it's coming, they might try to remove property, hide assets, or create problems. I understand. Also, I want you to start documenting even more carefully. Keep that voice recorder on you. If they say anything threatening or make any admissions, we want it recorded. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without telling them. I left Catherine's office feeling like a different person than the one who'd walked in. I had a plan. I had a lawyer. I had legal protection. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had power. When I got home at 4:30 p.m., Sienna was in the living room setting up for photos. She draped a white sheet over my couch and arranged various props for what appeared to be some kind of cozy fall aesthetic shoot. She'd also moved my reading chair again, pushing it completely out of the room and into the hallway. My chair was fine where it was, I said calmly, walking past her. It was in the way of my lighting setup, she replied without looking up from her phone. I need the space. This is my living room, Sienna. Not your photography studio. God, Margaret, do you have to make everything difficult? She finally looked at me, her expression full of exasperation. I'm trying to work here. This is literally how I make money. You don't make money. You haven't made a single dollar since you moved in here. Her face flushed red. That's not true. I have sponsorship deals pending, and You quit your job because you thought being an influencer would be easier. Now you spend all day taking photos of coffee cups and calling it work. But you're living in my house, rent-free, eating food you didn't pay for, using utilities you don't contribute to, and acting like you own the place. I am so sick of your attitude, Sienna hissed, standing up. You walk around here like you're some kind of martyr, like we should all be grateful for your presence. Newsflash, Margaret, you're bitter and lonely and jealous that your son found someone who makes him happy. I took a breath, staying calm. The voice recorder in my cardigan pocket was running. I'd turned it on before getting out of my car, just in case. I'm not jealous, Sienna. I'm protective of my home and my rights. And I'm done being pushed around. You're done. Really? She laughed, sharp and mean. What are you going to do, Margaret? You're a 70-year-old woman with no power and no options. Dash and I are staying here, and there's nothing you can do about it. Eventually, you'll get tired of fighting and you'll leave. That's how this ends. We'll see about that, I said quietly, and walked to my room. Behind me, I heard her mutter, crazy old bitch. All of it was on the recorder. That evening, Dashiell came home late, after 8 p.m. I was in the kitchen making myself dinner, a simple chicken stir-fry with vegetables from my garden. He walked in, loosened his tie, and opened the refrigerator. Where's Sienna? He asked. I have no idea. Upstairs, I assume. He pulled out a beer and leaned against the counter. I could feel him watching me as I cooked. She said you two had an argument, he finally said. We had a conversation. She didn't like what I had to say. Mom, why can't you just try to get along with her? Why do you have to make everything so hard? I turned off the stove and faced him. Dashiell, I want you to answer a question honestly. Do you love her, or do you love what she represents? He frowned. What kind of question is that? A fair one. Do you love Sienna for who she is, or do you love the idea of her? The Instagram-ready girlfriend, the lifestyle she presents, the image of success she helps you project? I don't have to justify my relationship to you. No, you don't. But you should justify your treatment of me to yourself. I moved closer to him, looking directly into his eyes. Your father and I raised you to be kind, respectful, and honorable. What happened to that man? For just a moment, I saw something flicker in his face, shame, maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by defensive anger. What happened as I grew up, he said coldly. I stopped being your little boy who needed you to take care of everything. I became my own person with my own life and my own priorities. And those priorities include treating your mother like garbage? They include building a future with the woman I love, even if you don't approve. I could accept the woman you love if she treated me with basic human decency. But she doesn't. And neither do you anymore. Dashiell set down his beer bottle with more force than necessary. You know what, Mom? Maybe you're right. Maybe we should all just admit that this living arrangement isn't working. Finally, something we agree on. Sienna and I have been talking. We think it might be better if you found somewhere else to live. Somewhere more suitable for someone your age. There it was. The direct statement I'd been waiting for. I reached into my pocket and felt the recorder, making sure it was still running. You want me to leave my own house? I asked, keeping my voice level. It's not about wanting you to leave. It's about recognizing that this house is too big for you, too much for you to maintain. You'd be happier in a senior community, with people your own age, with activities and social opportunities. This is my home, Dashiell. I'm not leaving. Mom, be reasonable. No. You be reasonable. This house is in my name. I pay for everything. I've lived here for 35 years. Why should I be the one to leave? Because Sienna and I need the space. We're trying to build a life, start a family eventually. We can't do that living in someone else's house. Then move out and get your own house. We can't afford, he stopped, realizing what he'd almost said. Can't afford your own house? I finished for him. So you're trying to push me out of mine so you can have it? Is that it? That's not what I said. But it's what you meant. I took a breath. I know about the mortgage pre-approval, Dashiell. I know about the real estate searches. I know you've been planning to sell this house and use the money to buy something else. His face went pale. How do you went through our things. You're trying to steal my house. Yes, I went through your things. And I found exactly what I expected to find. We're not trying to steal anything. Eventually, I'll inherit this house anyway. We're just trying to accelerate the timeline. Accelerate the timeline? I felt anger rising in my chest. You mean you're trying to push me out now instead of waiting for me to die? Do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you're saying? Mom, I didn't mean it like. Yes, you did. You meant it exactly like that. You and Sienna want me gone so you can have my house, and you don't care how much you hurt me in the process. Sienna appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening. Oh, drop the victim act, Margaret. You're not some helpless old lady. You're a manipulative woman who's trying to control your son's life. I'm trying to protect my home from thieves. Even if one of them is my own son. Thieves. Sienna's voice rose. How dare you? We've done nothing but try to help you, and this is how you repay us. Help me? You've taken over my bedroom, dismissed my belongings, criticized everything about me, and made detailed plans to push me out of my own house. That's not help. That's abuse. You can't prove any of that, Sienna shot back. I smiled, cold and hard. Actually, I can. I have photos of your journal, Sienna. The one where you wrote about manipulating the old lady and waiting for me to die. I have photos of the real estate brochures and the mortgage pre-approval letter. I have bank records showing I pay for everything. I have a timeline documenting every incident of your behavior. And I have recordings of conversations, including this one. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the color drain from both their faces as they realized what I'd done. You've been recording us? Dashiell's voice was barely a whisper. Only when I'm part of the conversation. Which is completely legal in Oregon. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and held it up. Every threat, every cruel comment, every admission of your plans, I have it all documented. Sienna looked at Dashiell in panic. Dash, she's bluffing. She doesn't. I'm not bluffing. And tomorrow morning, I'm taking all of this evidence to court. I'm filing for a restraining order based on elder abuse and financial exploitation. If the judge grants it, and my lawyer is very confident that he will, you'll have 24 hours to get out of my house. You can't do that. Sienna's voice was shrill now. This is insane. Dash, tell her she can't do that. But Dashiell was staring at me with something like shock. Mom, you're really going to do this? You're really going to take legal action against your own son? You're really stealing from your own mother, I replied. So yes, I'm really going to do this. You forced my hand. We can talk about this, he said, and I heard desperation creeping into his voice. We can work something out. You don't need to involve lawyers and courts. We're past that point. Way past it. Mom, please. Don't do this. I'm your son. And I'm your mother. Which you forgot the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. The words hung in the air between us. I saw him flinch, saw the truth of it hit him. Get out of my kitchen, I said quietly. Both of you. I can't look at you right now. They left, and I heard them arguing in urgent whispers as they went upstairs. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking now that the confrontation was over, and allowed myself a moment of reaction. I'd done it. I'd confronted them, told them I knew everything, warned them what was coming. Catherine had told me not to tip them off, but I didn't care. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to spend the next 24 hours in fear and uncertainty, the way they'd made me feel for weeks. I wanted them to understand that they'd underestimated me at their own peril. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I heard them packing upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing, suitcases being pulled from closets. Maybe they were getting ready to run. Maybe they were just preparing for the worst. Either way, I didn't care. The next morning, I went to Catherine's office at exactly 10 a.m. She had the restraining order petition prepared, along with all the supporting documentation. I signed where she indicated, affirmed that everything in the petition was true and accurate, and authorized her to file on my behalf. The court has an emergency docket session this afternoon, Catherine told me. Given the evidence and the nature of the abuse, I'm confident we'll get a hearing Monday morning. Can you be there? Absolutely. And Mrs. Hartley? Be prepared for your son to try to talk you out of this. Once they receive notice of the hearing, they'll know this is real. They may try to apologize, make promises, say anything to get you to drop the petition. I won't, I said firmly. I'm done being manipulated. Good. Because you deserve better than what they've been giving you. I went home to find Dashiell's car in the driveway. My stomach clenched, but I walked into my house with my head high. They were waiting for me in the living room. Sienna looked furious, her arms crossed over her chest. Dashiell looked defeated, slumped in the chair. We need to talk, Dashiell said as soon as I walked in. There's nothing to talk about. Mom, please. Just listen. We were wrong, okay? We shouldn't have done what we did. We shouldn't have tried to take over your house or make plans without including you. We're sorry. I looked at him, at the son I'd raised, and felt nothing but sadness. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. That's not true. I really am. If you were really sorry, you would have stopped when I first asked you to treat me with respect. You would have stopped when I told you I was uncomfortable. You would have stopped before you made plans to sell my house out from under me. I set down my purse and faced them both. You were sorry when you thought you could get away with it. Now you're just scared. We'll leave, Sienna said suddenly. Right now. We'll pack up and leave today, and you'll never hear from us again. Just don't file that restraining order. Don't make this a legal thing. Why? I asked. Worried about what it will do to Dashiell's reputation at work? Worried about having a legal record of elder abuse? Mom, a restraining order on my record could ruin my career, Dashiell said desperately. Please. We'll leave voluntarily. Isn't that what you want? What I want is justice. What I want is for there to be consequences for what you tried to do to me. What I want is for you to understand that you can't treat people this way, especially your own mother, and expect to just walk away without repercussions. So this is about revenge? Sienna spat. You're just a vindictive old. Sienna, shut up, Dashiell cut her off, his voice sharp. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, I am so sorry. I let Sienna convince me that we were justified, that we were just trying to build our future. I let her turn me into someone I don't recognize. Please. Give me a chance to make this right. I looked at my son, and for the first time in weeks, I saw genuine remorse in his face. But I also remembered every cruel comment, every dismissive look, every moment he'd chosen her over me. You'll have your chance to speak at the hearing on Monday, I said. If you want to apologize, you can do it in front of a judge. If you want to explain yourself, you can do it under oath. But I'm not dropping the petition. Mom. You need to leave now. Both of you. Go stay with friends or get a hotel room. But I want you out of my house by tonight. We have nowhere to go, Sienna protested. That's not my problem. You have until 8 p.m. to get your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police and reporting you as trespassers. I walked to my room and closed the door, my heart pounding. I heard them arguing in the living room, heard Sienna crying and raging, heard Dashiell making phone calls. I sat on my bed and waited. At 7:45 p.m., I heard car doors closing. I went to the window and watched Dashiell's car pull out of the driveway, packed full of their belongings. They were gone. I walked through my house in the sudden silence. I went to the master bedroom and stood in the doorway, looking at the space they'd claimed. The bed was unmade, there were empty hangers in the closet, but it was mine again. I walked into the living room and moved my reading chair back to its proper position. I went to the garage and retrieved my oak coffee table, bringing it back inside and placing it where it belonged. Slowly, methodically, I began reclaiming my home. The hearing on Monday was brief. Catherine presented our evidence, the journal entries, the financial documents, the recordings, my testimony. Dashiell and Sienna showed up with their own lawyer, but they had no defense against the documentation we provided. Sienna's own written words condemned them. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who reminded me of my late mother, looked at Dashiell with disappointment as she granted the restraining order. Mr. Hartley, she said, your behavior toward your mother constitutes textbook elder abuse. You're fortunate she's not pressing criminal charges. The restraining order is granted for 1 year, during which time you are prohibited from contacting your mother, coming within 500 feet of her residence, or making any attempts to claim interest in her property. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Dashiell mumbled. As we left the courthouse, Dashiell tried to approach me. His lawyer held him back, reminding him of the restraining order that was now in effect. But I saw his face. I saw the regret, the shame, the realization of what he'd lost. 3 months later, I was sitting in my master bedroom, my reclaimed master bedroom, reading by the window when my phone rang. It was Vivian. How are you doing? She asked. I'm good, I said, surprised to realize it was true. Really good, actually. I'm proud of you, Margaret. What you did took courage. What I did was protect myself. Something I should have done sooner. After we hung up, I looked around my room. My furniture was back in place. My photographs were on the walls. My mother's quilt was on my bed. My house felt like mine again. I'd changed the locks, repainted the master bedroom walls, and planted new flowers in the garden. I joined a book club at the library and started volunteering at the senior center. I'd reclaimed not just my house, but my life. Did I miss my son? Every single day. Did I regret what I'd done? Not for a moment. Because I'd learned something important in those terrible weeks. Love shouldn't require you to surrender your dignity, your home, or your sense of self. Love shouldn't make you smaller, quieter, less. And if someone, even your own child, treats you as if you don't matter, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Or in my case, make them walk away. I was 70 years old, and I'd finally learned to put myself first. To fight for myself. To understand that I deserved respect and kindness, and that it was okay to demand it. My house was quiet now, but it was peaceful. It was mine. And that was enough. As for Dashiell and Sienna, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they broke up 2 months after the hearing. Apparently, without my house to steal and my money to plan for, they didn't have much holding them together. Dashiell moved to Seattle for a new job. Sienna moved back in with her parents. The restraining order would expire in 9 more months. I didn't know if Dashiell would reach out when it did. I didn't know if I'd want him to. Our relationship might never recover, and I'd made peace with that possibility. Because I'd learned the hardest lesson a mother can learn: sometimes loving your child means protecting yourself from them. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is show them that actions have consequences. Sometimes the most important relationship you need to fight for is the one you have with yourself. I was Margaret Catherine Hartley. I was 70 years old. I was a homeowner, a survivor, and a woman who'd finally learned her own worth. And I was enough.